we hear over and over again, I need more personalization. I need better customer journeys. I think it starts with thinking beyond that. And I think that, again, like that's not necessarily a bad approach, but if it's the only thing you're employing, you're leaving all of that unidentified demand on the table.
Welcome to State of CRM podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm Matt.
Today, Matt, we are talking about unidentified demand. What is sitting on your data in your customer database and how to detect that. That's a topic that we are, addressing almost every single time with clients and marketers. We, as marketers, are sitting on a ton of consumer. Database are really, we have a lot of consumer in the database, and we have a lot of product to sell. The issue is how do we match this consumer with the product and the right offer, and how do we leverage the information we have in the database to do that. So let's jump into the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked about it a lot, but a CRM marketer's like biggest asset is their first party data. And all of the tools that are required for them to be able to tap into that unidentified demand exist at their fingertips. And I mean, when we're talking about first party data, we're talking about customer data, we're talking about loyalty data, transactional data, web data, like all of the different data sets that marketers have access to. And I know we talk a lot about it as well, but there's, obviously data can be sitting in different ways. Like some people have it very much structured internally in a data lake. Some marketers leverage a CDP or a cloud, and in some cases, the data kind of sits everywhere. But as we've talked a lot about, that doesn't mean no matter which path that you're on or where your data is currently at, that you can't use it to essentially identify demand that you're not tapping into. And I think like what's really interesting about this topic and questions we get from marketers really all the time is how are we able to actually tap into that? Because like, For big enterprise brands, that's potentially millions of dollars of unrealized revenue or even more that's just sitting there. That's just like within their database that needs to be uncovered. And it's all about really using your data in the right way and finding the right signals that actually indicate demand. And then once you're able to do that, you're essentially tapping into a vast amount of potential revenue without even needing to acquire a single additional contact.
Yeah, and the thing is that this data is hidden this information is hidden in your data. That's really, important to understand that you don't necessarily need to add third-party data. We have so many times the conversation that, okay, but that's super, super nice. We have data, but let's enrich that with external data. The point is, let's start to use what you have. There are so many opportunities left on the table with the data you have already, instead of looking after and making enrichment of the set you have. And something that everyone gets, I think, is people are complicated. There are a lot of different of behavior or expectation of needs. And another thing that I think we can all agree on is that you will not buy something if you don't have the need. If the product, the offer, the service is not solving for a need. We agree that the need can be very different. That can be a lot of type. That can be really for personal pleasure. That can be for very practical thing that's moving from a point A to a point B. That can be going to holiday. But that's a need from a human. And this is specific, and that's customer centric. That's their need as a consumer. And ask yourself that when you buy something, you're not buying it because someone pushed that to you. That's not if there is no use, you're not bringing something home that will just sit on your shelf and there is really no use. Even if at some point you don't need it anymore, there was this small moment in the life when you you bought it, there was a need. You felt this need. And if you have that in mind as a marketer, then I'm just questioning, why are we still trying to push only 1, 2, or 3 offers to the entire database?
Yeah.
There is so many opportunities sitting hidden in this database, in your consumer base, and the only way to leverage that is to leverage the product you have and showing the right product that solves for every needs, and maybe that's very small groups of people with a specific need. But you'll make money from that. You'll make business. You'll make orders. And I mean, I'm saying money because the goal, mainly the goal of every business is to make revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about really the potential opportunity there is, if you think about it as the potential for, if you were to sell basically if you were to address every single customer need in your database with the products that you have available. So essentially capturing every single sales opportunity within your database, like that's the total demand opportunity that you have within your CRM database. And a lot of marketers are not capturing all of that. Like you say, they're like only pushing a few marquee offers, or they're leaving out potential demand because they don't know how to identify which customers might actually be interested in specific offers that they have. Or they're reaching people with the wrong offers. And so that basically the sales that they're making, or that universe that I described, that perfect situation where you're filling all of the customer needs with the offers that you have available, minus what you're currently selling, there's a gap there. And that gap represents essentially the untapped revenue that you have, or that's available. And that's a huge, enormous potential amount of sales for you. And what can be difficult is essentially tapping into that, because customers, like you mentioned, customers are really complicated, and it's very, very difficult to get somebody to explicitly tell you, well, I need product X, Y, or Z. They may not even know that it's something that they want until they see it or they're exposed to it. And in addition to that, it's constantly shifting over time. What I want today may not be something that I need tomorrow. So also demand is not a static thing. It's something that's in the moment is different than in a different time period. So it's not an easy task by any means.
Yeah, and so on this specific talking point, that I will highlight 2 things that you said, and we mentioned that. One is, you need, as a marketer, to highlight the benefits of the offer or the products, and then if you showcase what the problem it's solving, or the need it's solving, and you put that in front of the right people, even if they don't know they have this need, they will discover it and understand it because of your work as a marketer. And that's really important. And the other point, and I mean, a big one, is the fact that I would say, like in SEO, in search engine optimization, there is a tactic for main products and the long tail. That if you rank correctly for every single small product, small categories, things that are not mainstream, you can do better performances, because every single small offer, small product will better perform individually on a small audience. And therefore you avoid competition, because you are not fighting for the top 1 query, or you are not fighting to sell the top seller of the category that every store is pushing out to everyone in their database. And most likely your consumer are also in other databases, so they maybe receive the same offer. If you do a better job and you put the right product in front of them, you win. That's the win. So and you really stand out from the competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think, the question begs itself, how do marketers identify that demand? How are they reading those signals that their customers, well, not even are telling them? That's the wrong way to go about it. How do you read essentially the signals that customers themselves might not even be purposefully sending to you? And I think why that's difficult, and so what marketers are doing is relying a lot of specifically what what they can sort of like understand in terms of what their data is telling them, or explicit signals. So looking for key moments that indicate that somebody is interested in a product, and that's up to human interpretation. So what I'm saying are things like product page visitation, or an interest in a past product or a past purchase may indicate, well, I'd be interested in something similar in the future, or perhaps I've searched for something specific. I, as a marketer, would say, okay, well, those are all things that indicate that this person is interested in buying this specific product. And what I think, like, and it's intuitively it makes sense, but where it falls flat are those are just like unique data points that actually tell you relatively little when you kind of compare it to the vast number of data points that you can get on an individual. Because going back to what we were saying originally, people are complex. Like what I'm doing in my day-to-day life and what motivates me to make one purchase over another purchase. Like we all have a finite, or most of us have a finite amount of resources in which we can spend on things. So we're constantly making trade-offs, and that becomes very complicated. So simply because I've searched for something or I've browsed a page doesn't always necessarily mean that I'm in a market for that specific item. And most of what marketers rely on, and most of what's available from a tech perspective in terms of like solutions to help marketers capture demand, rely on these explicit signals. But what data science has found is that there's actually not always a strong link, which is interesting because it's counterintuitive, between some of those explicit signals and what people actually buy, which then essentially means that that huge bubble of demand, that gap that we were talking about earlier between the optimal number of sales you can obtain and what you're actually getting, you're still not capturing that. You're not closing that gap enough. So marketers are still, even upon relying on these explicit signals, which is better than doing nothing, there's still tons of demand being left on the table because it's sort of treating people like robots, like A, B. I'm going to make one decision versus the other, but it's not, people don't operate that way. There's so many things that influence purchase decisions.
Yeah, that's super hard. And that's, I mean, we jumped into our next talking point on that theme is, I mean, not all signals are equal or created equally. So there are a lot of different interaction, communications, data points in the relationship with the consumer, and they are not all equal, and everything is moving. All this type of data points. So we are talking about past purchase, website visits, search term, abandoned card. You mentioned other data points, Matt. But all these data points, they are not all equal, but over time, the weight will change, and that's also that will also change for each individual. So at the same time, the weight of one of the data points will be different for one consumer to another, and that just adds up in the complexity of how do we calculate that as a marketer. And I mean, no later than last Friday, I had a discussion with an executive in CRM worldwide company that's, as a team, every week building audiences for the outreach campaigns, whatever the channel they are using, and making a very complex process of trying to identify who purchased this product, what's the descriptive the descriptive fields or data points that they can leverage to identify other people in the database that looks like these clients. But the fact is that they are limited in terms of computing, capacity, because that's the human limitation. That's, okay, we are taking 15, maybe 20 different criteria. You have, okay, zip code, past purchase, amount, loyalty program members or not. Okay, but that's still limited to 20 data points. If you look at how many data points and type of small interaction your consumer had in the past with your brand, you will discover that there are thousands of them, and selecting 20 of them, won't tell you anything that is really relevant and that will help you to put the right offer in front of the right product.
100%.
Oh, the right consumer, sorry.
Yeah. And I think like that's the issue with segmentation right there. Even like sophisticated segments built off of like complex buyer personas, women 18 to 34, urban, high income, certain lifestyle characteristics, all of those things. To your point, even if you have 20 attributes, which a lot of personas don't even have that many, like that is not that much in terms of like really understanding people. But what it also does is like, I would say arguably you could make the argument, for example, that if you looked at the sales, you were selling handbags and you looked at sales of handbags, it's probably likely that it would skew female. However, in that situation, you're still leaving out potentially a huge percent of revenue opportunity because there are probably non-females that are actually buying handbags as well. So in addition to just sort of narrowing it down into very specific types of people, you're also ignoring sort of all of the other individuals that would potentially fall into that buying category. So, we're going back to square one where we're saying we're not closing that gap. There's still unidentified demand being left on the table. And so explicit signals can't really help you with that. And the reason is because you're literally just breaking down people based on things that you as a human can understand, which sort of brings us to the next point, which is, what do you do then? Like, okay, that's great. That you pointed out a lot of challenges in terms of building out segments and why they're not necessarily capturing 100% of that identified demand. Well, the answer is in implicit signals, and that's something that really only data science, machine learning specifically, is going to be able to help you with. And what we've actually found are there are things that are actually more significantly indicative of buying intent than things like past purchases or website browsing. And there are things that aren't necessarily intuitive, nor things that you as a person are going to be able to understand on your own. So it could be anything from like first name, which you'd probably like, well, why does that matter? But certain time periods, certain first names were more popular, which can actually indicate whether or not somebody might be more likely to buy something. Or even location, like urban isn't necessarily enough. There might be a zip code somewhere for a specific product set that's actually a higher indicator that somebody living within that zone, even if they're not living in a city, might be buying a certain specific product. And those are implicit signals, things that you intuitively don't necessarily understand on your own. Or even from like a past purchase perspective, like just because somebody bought swim in the past doesn't mean they're looking for swim right now. However, there could be like some other sort of activewear that they have purchased in the past that's a stronger indicator that they might be looking for swimwear now. And it's not only taking these data points in silo uniquely, it's when you sort of identify what's significantly likely to predict purchase now and combine those things together. And that's where the machine learning comes into play to be able to understand demand now. And so it's a little bit tricky kind of thinking about the differences between the two, but implicit signals are like really just millions and millions of data points that an individual person is never going to be able to just understand on their own. It's something that they need like machine learning and complicated AI to help with.
Yeah, and you gave an example of maybe 15, 20 different data points, and I said that there are millions of the different type of data points and things like that. And what the machine will be able to do is to identify patterns. So the goal is, the machine will identify pattern among the combination, all the possibilities of combination of patterns between all these data points. And even if you think about the 10, 15, 20 data points, that's a lot of different paths that can be analyzed. But we are talking about a lot more data, so a ton more of data, and it can be done manually. That's why the technology is really helpful for that. We can set up machine to identify that, to learn from that. But the only thing is just letting the machine learn from the real data set and not bringing in some bias, human bias, saying that's now let's reduce the computing time or effort and just look at for this deep code or this area, this age of the consumer, are they in the loyalty program or not? Sometimes that data or these data points are important, sometimes they are not. And again, over time it changes, and individual by individual it changes. So just manually, if you make these choices, your input, your insight are biased for the learning. So just make the machine learn from the entire data set and not a reduced part of it because you have a feeling, the gut feel,
Yeah, 100%. And even some of the things that seem the most obvious don't necessarily predict intent or help you identify that unidentified intent. Like all the time we hear, like, why aren't the people in my loyalty program converting more? And I think that's like a really good real world example. And, we found over and over again that sometimes the loyalty is not necessarily a strong indicator that somebody's going to buy a specific product, potentially a strong indicator of a higher customer lifetime value over time. But if you're looking to push out products in the moment, it's not necessarily going to lead you to identifying the right individuals in your database just to target with a specific category or offer or brand. So I think it is really interesting. And that's really, when we talk about unidentified demand, that's why it is unidentified. If explicit signals told you everything you needed to know, you'd be able to capture 100% of your potential sales for every single product.
Yeah. And make me smile. The example you gave you can't push out or send or promote an offer that will solve the need of the entire loyalty members. The loyalty membership is helpful for different things in marketing and in the relationship, building the relationship between the consumer and the brand. But that can't be a criteria that's define people that will be keen to buy the product and solve all these members solve the same issue or some need.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so our next topic is what can we do, and what's the solution? We tapped already a little bit into that, but what can we do as a marketer for really improve all this approach?
Yeah, I think it starts with something we're big advocates for, and that's challenging the status quo and thinking about different ways of doing things. So I think there's still a hyper focused on creating personalized journeys, for example, based on triggers, and triggers are explicit signals. Yeah. So I think we hear over and over again, I need more personalization. I need better customer journeys. I think it starts with thinking beyond that. And I think that, again, that's not necessarily a bad approach, but if it's the only thing you're employing, you're leaving all of that unidentified demand on the table. And it's just such a waste to focus on acquisition and spend so much money on that when there's this literally a pile of money sitting within your database that you're just not tapping into. So I think one is to start kind of thinking about what relevancy and personalization really means, and moving beyond relying on those explicit signals, and thinking about new ways to be able to tap into that unidentified demand. So I would say it starts there. So one is sort of challenging the way the market is headed and the way people are thinking. And I think eventually we're already seeing a lot of challenges with scaling trigger-based personalization in terms of the results they're driving, but also the ability to reach all of the right customers with the broad offers in your catalog, or the broad breadth of numbers, or the number of offers in your catalog. And I think that's probably a really good place to start. So then the question is what can you do beyond that?
Yeah. Another thing that's you can also think about to implement or to challenge. You said that challenge status quo. If you have a persona, if you have or personas that you describe you have in your company, that's what are your consumer, and one type of product or category of product is for this persona, another one for another one. Have a look into the persona, how the persona is described. The thing is, describing or building a persona based on demographics is wrong. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's not accurate. That won't help you to market your product, to do marketing with your product to your consumer, and to build this relationship you want to build. I'm not saying that you don't need a persona. You need to build a persona on what's people or this core, this persona want to achieve, what their goal, what's the action they are taking, whatever the demographic, the information they have. That's regroup them by need, by problem they want to solve, by service they will use because they have this need or this problem to fix. And then that's way much simpler. That's easier to build a CRM strategy, a marketing strategy, campaign plan. That's okay. You have different persona in your database with different needs. What are the products that are matching or solving for this need? And you have and really improved segmentation compared to a segment that are based on demographics. But we mentioned that segmentation is just the beginning. That's better than blasting everyone, but we can go. That's not individualization, and the goal is to go way further. But I think that's a good starting point if you want to dig a little bit in the way the segments are built internally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also too about sort of exploring, because this is complicated. I mean, we're basically recommending that you use advanced machine learning to predict and identify intent that you can't find as a marketer. And like the reason marketers rely on triggers is because it's doable. Like you can segment based on website visitation or past purchase. So a good place to start would be to tap into your data science team, see what they can help with. Like they're going to be experts in terms of machine learning. Are they able to help you sort of identify intent or build audiences based on that? I think once individuals get sophisticated enough, the challenge you run into there is you're trying to scale that out with humans. But it's a good place to start, and it's a good place to start learning about like what capabilities you have in house and where some of the gaps might lie. And then once that's identified, that's when you can turn to solutions in market. And there are companies, as we know, that offer advanced AI solutions that can help facilitate this machine learning at the scale you need, because essentially we're talking about many offers being sent potentially per week, many different campaigns, constant demand change. So you need to be running and refreshing your data and running the analysis sort of essentially on a daily basis to be able to capture the most up-to-date demand for all of your different offers. But there are solutions out there that can help you with that, but there are also really smart individuals who are thinking about this every single day as well, and they can kind of help point you in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, I think we made some points on or enough points to make the audience and marketers listening to us to understand that maybe when they think about expanding their data sets and acquiring or adding third-party data, maybe there is more efficient ways to leverage and get better performance from what they already have instead of trying to add more data that's coming from outside. And hopefully that will help everyone to get better results in their campaign plan and in their marketing action.
Absolutely. Yep. It all starts with again challenging the status quo and thinking about maybe doing things in newer, different ways.
Thank you very much for listening. We are talking to you next week.
Talk to you next week. Thank you so much. Bye.